Welcome to Handmade Happenings. I'm Marissa and I'm about to start a new project. I'm actually a little nervous about this one because I'm anticipating it taking a while, but I am going to hand sew a dress. Now this is one of those ideas that I've kind of had for a while, but I've never gotten around to doing it. And now seems like the perfect time to try it because I am actually ahead in my filming for videos for this channel, so I was supposed to take this month off, and therefore it seems like a good time to start a longer project. Today I'm using blue cotton broadcloth, and for my pattern I am using the Princess Seam pattern that I drafted in a recent video. So I just pinned the pattern onto my fabric like usual and then traced around the pieces. Now this pattern was drafted without seam allowance, so this is marking my stitching line specifically. And for the pieces that needed to be cut on the fold, what I did is I would extend the line onto the other side at both the top and bottom of the pattern pieces. And then I would remove the pattern and then place it on the other side using those extended lines to make sure that I was placing the pattern piece in the right spot. And then just traced it again on the other side. Once I had all of my pattern pieces traced out the appropriate number of times, I then went back and added seam allowance to these, basically just marking, I believe it was about 3/4 of an inch away from my stitching line for my cutting line. Once all of that was done, I then just cut it all out. Alright, so it is a new day. I have taken the time to get all of my stuff set up and I'm ready to start actually sewing the dress. I'm going to see how far I get in the next couple of hours before it will be time to take a break for lunch. Now, I left the seam allowance off my pattern pieces on purpose, and that's because when hand sewing, I don't have a presser foot or a stitch guide to show me how far I am from the edge of the fabric, and so I needed those stitch lines traced to show me what I'm doing. However, I did trace this in heat erase pen, and I always iron all of my pattern pieces after they're cut out because I just find that no matter what I do when ironing them before I cut things out, they always still look really bad after I've cut it out. So I need something to make these marks more permanent. So to do this, I just used a running stitch to trace these stitch lines. And I didn't double my thread for this, so what I would do is I would just run it all the way through until the thread got too short and just came off the needle, and then I would start again with another piece of thread. And I use this as an opportunity to use up all of my colored thread that was already on needles, as well as some thread off of an improperly wound bobbin. After a quick ironing, it was time to start the assembly. I started by attaching the front side pieces to the center front piece and repeating for the back. I just pinned them along the stitching line and then stitched on the inside of those running stitches. I've been working on the seam for a while and I'm starting to have second thoughts because I've noticed, I don't know if it'll actually show up on the video, but I've noticed that the stitches are kind of visible, like that thread is visible, and I'm obviously using white thread because that's what I usually use when I sew seams that are going to be on the inside, but that's with a machine, so I don't know that that's going to work for this. I think I may need to switch to blue thread. I went ahead and decided that I was going to do the blue thread, and rather than point out the original back stitching that I did in white, what I did was just come back on just slightly more in, slightly further away from the edge of my fabric. I just did a running stitch in the blue, and I doubt it really shows up, but it did make a big difference on my seams in that now if there's tension put on that seam, you're seeing the blue thread, which blends in more as opposed to that tension being put on the white thread that really shows up. So I've done that for the whole length of where I had already sewn, and I guess now I'll just continue on with the blue thread on these seams. So from under the arm down to the waist of the dress, I used a back stitch because this is a really strong stitch, and I figured that part of the dress would probably have the most pressure on it. Then from the waist down to the skirt hem, I just used a running back stitch to speed things up a little bit. Then I flipped the dress or the pieces right side up so that I could see where any of those running stitches were showing on the outside of the dress. And when I found them, I just carefully snipped them off so that you could not see them. After pressing the seams open, I then took the raw edges and actually folded them towards each other, basically sandwiching them inside of the seam, and then stitched them together. I started with a whip stitch and then switched to more of a ladder stitch because I found that just gave kind of a cleaner finish. Okay, so I have the first 4 seams completely done and all the raw edges finished. I am reaching a point where I'm having to take more breaks as I'm working on this, so I'm imagining that my productivity is going to go down. From this point forward, I'm not anticipating checking in a whole lot. A lot of the rest of the video will probably be voiceover. So I continued by sewing one of the side seams and both of the shoulder seams and then finishing them like I did for the other seams. On the other side, I only stitched down about an inch or 2 and then left the raw edges undone because this is the side where the zipper is going to go later. And from this point on, you may not see quite as much actual sewing footage because, let's face it, all of it kind of starts to look the same, especially I think with hand sewing. Alright, so I finally reached a point where I could actually try this on and make sure it fit, and thankfully it does, because that would have been very disappointing if I had needed to figure out a way to somehow pull out stitches. With the body of the dress done, I took a break and went on to work on the sleeves, which included actually tracing the sleeves and cutting them out and then basting the stitching lines because I did not do all of that when I started. And then I sewed the underarm seam on both sleeves and finished the raw edges, and after that realized that I had sewn one of them the wrong way because my sleeves do have a front and a back, meaning that how I had sewn them, I had 2 left sleeves. So I had to tear all of that stitching out on one of them and redo it. I guess that is the downside of solid fabrics. So after redoing that seam, I went ahead and hemmed both of the sleeves before attaching them to the dress using a back stitch. Now I finished these seams differently than I did the others, so I trimmed down one of the seam allowances to be smaller and then folded the other one over twice, like around that raw edge. I believe this is called something like toning and felling the seam or something like that. I thought it would have been easier because with sleeves, you know, the sleeve is shaped one way and then the armhole is shaped a different way, and I was just thinking this would be easier than doing it the other way. Turns out it really wasn't. In fact, I think they probably would have been about equally difficult. And I used a facing to finish the neckline. Alright, so it is basically put together, sleeves, facing, and I anticipate that I only have one more day of work left on this, which will be the zipper, the final seam, and hemming it. And I did sew the zipper in by hand. I used a back stitch, and actually after I finished all of the filming, I did have to go back and redo one side because I had kind of gotten my stitches almost too close to the zipper teeth, and it eventually the thread just got caught in the zipper, so I had to redo that. But otherwise it went in relatively okay. And for the raw edges, where the zipper was sewn, what I did was I just tucked that raw edge up so that it was between the seam and the zipper to hide it, and ran a running stitch down that. Then I stitched and finished the rest of that side seam the way I did all of the other ones. I pressed the hem up along the marked line and then pressed around the hem again, this time toning up the raw edge so that it was folded under. I then pulled out the basting stitches before whip stitching the hem in place. So it's finished. This took a total of 5 days of hand sewing, 1 day for cutting out, and 2 or 3 days of breaks in between all of those days, for a total of 8 or 9 days of actual work on this project.